Last week, Turkey's foreign ministry called on Sweden to honor a deal it made with Ankara back in June to crack down on terror groups operating in their country. In exchange, Turkey had pledged to support Sweden's entry into NATO, but Ankara says the necessary steps have not been taken yet. The foreign ministry's remarks came just days after Sweden held parliamentary elections, where right-wing parties won big. At a NATO summit in June, Sweden and Finland agreed to crack down on activities by the PKK within their borders, which the EU and US recognize as a terror group. During a recent interview, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said that Sweden had long tolerated activities by the PKK, with its supporters reaching all the way to parliament. So will Sweden's next government follow through with its pledge it made with Türkiye? And does the PKK supporters have an outsized influence on Swedish politics? And for more on this, I'm joined by Klaus Jurgens. He is a political analyst and joins me from Ankara, and by Joseph Downing. He's a visiting fellow at the European Institute at the London School of Economics. A warm welcome to you both, and thanks for joining me on Straight Talk. So, Joseph, Finland and Sweden's NATO membership bids were once again in international headlines when Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan gave an interview to PBS in New York ahead of the UNGA 77 session. So how do you think the ratification process across the alliance is coming along so far?
Yeah, it's been a very complex process, right? Because on the surface, it wouldn't seem to be complex to admit Finland and Sweden to NATO, right? Two, advanced democracies, good governance, good levels of military spending, very professional armed forces. And the sticking point really came here in terms of it was seen as Sweden's soft line on PKK Kurdish activity in migrant communities within Sweden. Mm-hmm. And this really has made the accession process a bit more difficult for these two states.
Here, I just want to play the clip from that interview to hear what President Erdogan said, then we'll continue to talk.
Here especially, Sweden has been a cradle for terrorism, and the terrorists have infiltrated all the way into their parliaments. And in Stockholm, we see terrorists are demonstrating all the time. The banners, the poster of the leader of the terrorist organizations are abound. They are demonstrating, they are throwing slogans, and they're attacking the innocent Turkish descendants in Stockholm.
So, Klaus, President Erdogan accused Sweden of being a cradle for terrorism and that the PKK infiltrated their parliament. So was that a fair assessment? And how deep do the rifts run between Ankara and Stockholm?
Well, I think these rifts can be overcome. I don't want to play devil's advocate, but Sweden will have a new government shortly. I'm not still very optimistic about the composure and how long it will last. But yes, where PKK supporters can march freely in broad daylight, the government says we were the first country to actually support banning the PKK, but still you don't do enough to really ban it. I think Turkey is absolutely right to demand more extradition of known criminals. At the same time, please withdraw any offer of holding manifestations or demonstrations in the name of a known terror organization in Stockholm or anywhere else in Sweden. So yes, Turkey was right. Now, looking ahead, I just came back, I have to admit, covering and going for another meeting. And what I sensed amongst the population is not the corona debate, not the I have to say very openly, not the Ukraine situation, but what the Swedish population, I think this time wanted is put Sweden first. Now, this is a very dangerous slogan, put a country first. What happens to the rest? So, yes, Sweden must do more with the PKK, against the PKK. And I really, really hope that the moderates, conservatives who believe in fighting terror under normal circumstances, who believe in a strong NATO, that they will come to help Turkey, yes.
So, Joseph, there's a new government in Sweden now, but Sweden's former Prime Minister Andersson has said her country will not extradite anyone unless Turkey proves that these people involved in terror attacks in Turkey. How about the people who help raise and move money for the terror activities?
Oh, again, this really depends. I mean, it's something that's a lot more difficult to investigate and to establish, right? I mean, you know, Turkey can name individuals that are have been involved in terror attacks, but money networks and the movement of money is always much more covert. It's always much more difficult to investigate, and it's also much more difficult to substantiate. However, Sweden is part of European anti-money laundering legislation, so it's likely that will play an important role in picking up and in deciding really who it is and how money is being moved, if it is, to fund Kurdish activities within Turkey.
So do you think, is this likely to change with the new Swedish government, that approach by a former prime minister?
Well, definitely. I definitely think, given the sort of the friendship between the left, not just in Sweden, but in Europe more generally, and the left-wing Kurdish Workers' Party, that relationship is comfortable, and that relationship now is not the relationship that governs the Swedish state. So a right-wing party coming in, one that is going to prioritize NATO membership and belonging to that particular club over and above, you know, an internationalized kind of socialist agenda, is one that will make this movement of money, I think, much more difficult. And I think the Swedish government will be much more proactive in looking at this issue, but with the caveat that they have a very small threshold with which they've managed to form a government. So how long this government will be around for and how stable this particular ruling arrangement will dictate a lot of what is to come.
So, Klaus, the two Nordic countries signed a memorandum with Türkiye in June to cooperate in the fight against terrorism, including the extradition of some 73 suspected terrorists. Is there any progress on that? And would Sweden's new anti-terrorist legislations be enough to soothe Türkiye's concerns?
No, I think Sweden's, and to a lesser extent, Finland's anti-terror legislation must be upgraded, updated, in line with the demands from Turkey, but maybe with a wider world. Turkey is a global, unfortunately, problem. It is not only in one country. Everyone has to work together. And no, this legislation must be updated, upgraded to make clear who can be extradited, what kind of manifestations can be allowed, what kind of organizations, money laundering, media houses, human trafficking, whatever you can do to outlaw this. So no, unfortunately for the time being, except for extraditing and accepting one gentleman, I just say gentleman because innocent until found guilty, who might be extradited, but he is no terrorist. I think this is playing to the gallery. Sweden, Finland must do much more.
So, Joseph, President Erdogan said Finland is calmer and in more control over the situation. Maybe he was referring to the protests staged by PKK sympathizers in Sweden. But what happens if Turkey ratifies Finland, but not Sweden? Will Finland, for example, defer joining?
Oh, this I think is a very unlikely outcome, especially with the ascension of a new right-wing government. I definitely think that both states are highly likely to be ratified. I think Erdogan here is attempting to get some concessions out of Sweden, but I don't think he would stand in the way given the gravity of the war in Ukraine, and especially given his recent shift, kind of more towards encouraging, Russia to stop its aggression in Ukraine. However, if this situation was arrived at, I think it's quite likely that Finland might put a pause on its ascension to NATO because it already has existing security guarantees.
So, Klaus, how would their membership change Europe's security architecture and their relationship, of course, with Russia?
Well, before the Ukraine situation, the Ukraine war broke out, I would have never expected Sweden or Finland to join, having been to Sweden in particular and knowing quite a few people there. It was not on the cards as basically a neutral, West-looking European Union member state. Now everything has changed. I can only imagine how difficult it was behind closed doors for the Social Democrats to ever accept a NATO membership or to even to propose it. Now, I think what will happen very shortly is that both countries will want to realign their relationships with Turkey, find out is it really the most important point to join NATO? I think they will both say yes. And then concessions have to be made. And I mentioned this before, and maybe I say it again, from a certain point onwards, perhaps Turkey should be given a much bigger role within NATO. After all, it has all the expertise. It is a huge contributor to all of NATO's members' security aspects, and a little bit more support from Sweden and Finland in particular would not harm at all.
All right, gentlemen, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.